Welcome to another episode of the Anti-Corruption Crusader podcast. Our podcast recognizes people from around the world with passion and expertise in integrity, ethics, and anti-corruption. We hope that our distinguished would inspire other people to follow on their quest for a clean, ethical, and non-corrupt society. My guest today is Lola Adekanye, and she's a special guest from Nigeria. Lola is an expert in anti-corruption policy, financial crime prevention, business ethics compliance. She currently leads the business integrity and anti-corruption programs in Africa, which spans 12 countries at the Center of International Private Enterprise, or CIPE. Prior to joining CIPE, Lola practiced white-collar crime defense, consulted for the World Bank Integrity Compliance Unit, and led business risk management projects at E-Trade. Lola is also a licensed attorney with both the member of the New York Bar Association and the Nigerian Bar, with more than a decade of experience in corporate attorney and compliance specialist. Good afternoon, Lola.
Good afternoon, Pana. It's great to connect with you on your podcast.
Well, welcome and thank you for joining us. First off, I just want you to maybe explain a little bit about your personal journey. I know you were trained as an attorney. You worked for a large corporation before. And how did you end up in the anti-corruption space?
Thank you, Pana. It's really great to be here. And I often like to tell this story, but it's a bit embarrassing. So I started off as a law student, and I think if I go back to when I was younger, I was that kid at home who everybody would say, look, you have to be a lawyer because you talk so much and you're so analytical. And it was a joke. But I remember experiencing what I realized later was injustice at probably the age of 11 or 12. And, that stayed with me. I spoke with our guidance and counselor about how that, really affected me, psychologically in a sense. And, they said, look, you should study law because then you can be like a human rights lawyer or a constitutional lawyer. Like you can defend people whose rights have been abused. And that was it. I thought, yes, human rights law, that's the thing to do. And so I went on to study in England. And, at the time, the United Nations had put forward the, Human Rights Convention, and it was a big deal. And, we're all figuring out how to comply with, I think it was around 1998 that the Human Rights Convention started getting ratified. And so come graduation, I had been doing some, part-time work on human rights law and realized, you know what? This will take a toll on me in a way that will not be ideal for a professional. You're getting too personally connected to your cases. That could jeopardize, the integrity of your cases. And I needed to find something I was as passionate about under the legal umbrella, close enough to human rights law. And anti-corruption was the thing that started to pop up as a very important thematic area linked to human rights abuse. And so between graduation and getting my first job around, compliance and business integrity, about 5 years from that, I was basically learning and picking up corporate law jobs, and anti-corruption related work was not on the radar at the time. Until I started working as a white-collar crime defense lawyer in DC and realizing that, hey, I could do more before companies become offenders. I could do more to prevent corruption than to defend companies that sometimes knew what they were doing was wrong, but they felt, well, would have a good white-collar crime defense attorney. And that was my, sort of mental journey through, what I needed to do. I ended up at the World Bank in the Integrity Compliance Office, trying to go away from after the fact, being a lawyer, helping companies after the fact, to, becoming a bit more proactive. And at the Integrity Compliance Office, it was just an eye-opener to see that companies in emerging markets, particularly Africa and Latin America, had a harder time understanding how to prevent corruption. And that was it for me. US companies, mostly European companies, but more US companies had figured out how to set up business ethics and integrity standards. And, in some cases, it was a check box exercise, but in other cases, it really did change, the corporate culture in these companies. But we were far from that in the African context, in the African business environment. And so that was it. That was my journey into, well, hold on a second, how can we help businesses? But how can we also shape the business environment? So how can we shape policies so that businesses become allies in preventing corruption? And that's sort of my journey. I think the journey continues. I'm still on that journey. Going from working with businesses to working with governments, now working with civil society. It's been an exciting one and one that enabled me meet really great Crusaders, some of them like yourself and a few of the folks we work with.
Thank you. That is great, a great journey. And I just want to touch or go back to the passion that you inspired to work on anti-corruption a little bit. Was there any particular event or what happened when you switched from human rights to anti-corruption? What motivated you to do that?
So there was this was during my time at the University of Warwick. I was working on a project that was like a clinic. You know how universities would have law clinics and they would represent clients, and so we had that. And this was a project in India. We needed to learn from the Shell case that was going on in Nigeria to help fix the project, to help, build up the theory of case for work happening in India where the rights of local communities had been abused. And building that theory of case was an eye-opener for me about the depths of the impact and injury caused by companies when they abuse the rights of local communities, but the decision makers are so far removed from those communities that suffer the consequences of their actions or their omissions. Mm-hmm. I found myself taking on cases and, becoming a whole lot mentally unstable in terms of just how personally affected I was by the cases. And so, feeling the pressure of having to save these clients of ours and making that or not being able to separate that from the rigor of research is a very risky dynamic for attorneys. Mm-hmm. And research and building your legal case. And so I just knew that if I was going to be able to fix anything in these countries, low-income countries or countries where the rule of law is not strong enough to protect minority communities or the communities that are often victims of abuse by large corporations that are usually very powerful in these countries. If I needed to be able to really make a difference, I would want to do that in a place from a position of policy making, strengthening mm-hmm. institutions, and not on a case-by-case basis where being so attached to the cases jeopardizes my ability as an attorney to stay completely, absolutely objective. And that's important to have, very strong theory of cases. So this particular community, and I still remember it like yesterday, had very similar dynamics to the Shell case in Nigeria, where the livelihoods of these communities had been destroyed by pollution. Children were experiencing terrible birth defects that could be connected to mismanagement of the waste in those communities. And unfortunately, the local authorities that had the responsibility to ensure health and safety standards were met were compromised. And so, you know, making it a corruption case was one thing, but that wasn't working because they could bribe all the way up to the highest, you know, chain of command. But making it a human rights case under the new Human Rights Convention at the time, a shiny new convention that every, you know, person wanted to test out and be the first to use, was then the more, you know, effective way to go. And that was what we were working on. And so realizing the role that corruption played in weakening institutions made me realize that, well, if I can fix this gap in terms of corruption, that would have a positive impact also on enforcing human rights in societies like that. So that was, yeah, that was an interesting time in my life.
Amazing, amazing. And I think that it's quite an inspiring story as well. Was it difficult transitioning from working in corporate cases and white collar crime cases to promoting ethics for SMEs? I know you founded and led the Ethics First program in Africa, is that correct? And
Yes.
primary, you know, trying to get the SMEs engaged in transparent business and doing business without corruption. How difficult was it transitioning from, you know, large corporations to working with
Yeah.
SMEs?
Yeah. I'm often, you know, I would often say when I'm asked how difficult was something to do in this space, I'll, you know, caveat it with, personally, I like challenges. I'm one to go for uncharted, you know, innovative ways of solving problems. So I may say it wasn't difficult because it wasn't really, it was exciting. It was intellectually the curious thing to do for me. But it will probably be tricky for someone to assume addressing corruption issues for MSMEs would be an easy thing to do with the mindset of doing that for corporates, larger corporates, right? I've seen how different it is, but there were quite a few things that made it quite, you know, easy sort of to transition. And one of them was just having the opportunity of working with businesses in Africa and on the case that we did in India very early on in my career, before working with large corporates, was exciting because I could see how businesses, smaller businesses in emerging markets, I could see how their, you know, orientation was so different from these much larger organizations, had bigger teams, more resources, bigger risks, you know, and worked in so many different jurisdictions. They had sound compliance teams and still got in trouble and still got sanctioned by the World Bank. But then these smaller teams that have no clue and have no resources also getting sanctioned by the World Bank using the same exact terms and standards. And so it was easy for me to understand how when a large multinational reads a notice of sanction, how that reads completely differently from when a small company reads a notice of sanction, and what they should do next. A large company sends it to us at the firm, or they send it first of all to their compliance, their risk team, the first line and second line of defense. They respond and they come back with boom, boom, boom. Tell me give me your opinion. Tell me what we should do. And we do this all the time. So we come back with solutions. But a small business doesn't know where to turn. And where they turn could be their Chamber of Commerce, could be their Institute of Directors. They also don't know where to turn. So understanding those differences was helpful for me to start, you know, and the first thing I did was I started a blog to start to help businesses unpack this. And I also did a lot of work with the World Bank to say, look, we need to change how we communicate. We need to change what information we provide so that it's different for small businesses. So that transition, which was driven by a very clear understanding of the gap in that industry, in the compliance industry for MSMEs and you know, versus for companies, larger companies, was sort of easy because here I was saying to myself, look, you have to do, I needed to do at least, I think I said for myself, something like, you know, 24 hours of reading or something like that to put together one blog post that provides advice for MSMEs, right? And when I was able to relocate to Nigeria and start working more on the continent, I added to that, well, beyond 24 hours of reading, I needed to do interviews with actual MSMEs that operate in the region, or with chambers of commerce that represents them, to be able to come up with more tailored resources that supports them. And, it's grown from that. It's grown from understanding the MSME perspective and providing compliance guidance to the external environment of MSMEs, and saying, well, how does the external environment of MSMEs influence their behavior? And that's where policy comes in. That's where advocacy comes in. How can policy and advocacy shape the corporate culture of smaller businesses? Larger businesses, their corporate culture is shaped, by global standards, by the leaders in those companies. MSMEs, their corporate culture, of course, is dictated by the tone at the top, indeed, but also what the market says about their survival tomorrow,
Right, right. What would be some of the examples that of the incentives that you use or offer to the SMEs for joining the program?
Oh yeah, I mean, this is a constant debate because of because of how the market dynamics change. But at least two always bubble up to the top, and that's access to finance for MSMEs in some cases, access to markets in other cases. But I am so pleased to also tell you, Pana, that I've heard from businesses that say, you know what? Even if we don't get access to finance, even if we have to compete, and even if we don't get these advantages that are business or market-oriented advantages, just the fact that we are thought of differently from what our environment says that businesses are prone to, which is corruption, is enough for us. One MSME leader I always remember, she says to me, look, I'm building an empire. And many companies in her industry and in the country she knows, when the founder retires, the companies just go down and are not able to survive. But she wants to see this company's name continue, like companies that were incorporated many years ago. And I'll end with what the late Mr. Hajjar said, the company in Sudan. It's not so much an MSME, but it owns a lot of subsidiaries that are small businesses. And they were the first to say, look, come and pilot Ethics First with us, even before Ethics First was a technological solution. It was all spreadsheets and paperwork. And they insisted, come and do this, we need it. And this was when Sudan was still sanctioned. And I said to him, why are you so keen on this? Because you're swimming against the tide. And he said, look, this company, Hajjar Group, has been in Sudan and operating for 135 years. It has seen revolution after revolution. It's seen administration that's prone to corruption and others that are not. Many other companies have died in that time. But what has kept them going is the trust of every local customer they have. And this will cement the values that the company has that will keep that trust when he's not here. He's late now, but I can see how Hajjar is flying a flag in Sudan, even through what Sudan is going through. Because of that sort of corporate commitment that he instilled through, building a program or a system that supports those values of ethics first. So I'm really glad to say it's not just the bottom line, the access to market and access to finance, but there are those businesses that have said the principle, the future, those things matter to them as well.
Well, that's quite an inspirational story, and hopefully we can talk more about Hajjar's business someday. We're about almost out of time, but before we go, could you maybe offer some inspiration to the younger listeners here on the podcast who may be thinking about working in ethics or compliance or anti-corruption? Why should they follow your footsteps?
So many reasons, but I'll settle for, three. And let me start with the first one that might sound funny. And this would be for those ones that are Africans or believe in the future of Africa. And it's, if you've watched the Black Panther and you've seen, Wakanda and all the nice things about the Black Panther that suggested, an African country with very superior technology and all that. If any young person dreams of the future of Africa where it's functional, there's stable electricity, there is lower crime rate, it's no longer a low income or a high poverty continent with countries with high poverty levels. If there is a beautiful dream of any African country, from Nigeria to Uganda to even Somalia, it would only be aided by very, very sound commitment to the shared values of ethics, integrity, and which includes, transparency, accountability, honesty, loyalty, all that kind of stuff. So I would say definitely, because of the beauty of a dream of a future where our countries in the region are no longer top of the list for receiving foreign aid, or no longer top of the list for illicit financial flows, but a region where highest quality of education can be received, highest levels of, innovation and technological advancement can actually happen, then I would say join this effort. The second thing I would say is you don't have to be a full-time ethics first crusader. You don't have to be, Pana, who's doing all of these things, and you don't have to focus on that. You could be in any field, medicine, accounting, any field at all, and still understand the importance of business ethics and integrity and promote it and advance it, advocate for it. And that's why we developed Ethics First. All the partners and the companies, over 700 plus companies and a value chain integrity partner and more working on Ethics First are not anti-corruption experts, but they lock hands with us and are pushing and promoting business ethics and integrity throughout the continent. So, that's the second. The third and final one would be, because there is no telling to how far AI will go to improve or destroy our world. I hope that it improves it. I think this is the time for us to work more with, technologically savvy folks, and most young people are growing up using technology, using AI and the rest. And Ethics First also is going to be introducing an AI component, by the way. I think I'm saying it publicly for the first time here. But having built Ethics First with software developers and just brilliant minds, in the AI space, and also, software technology space, I can see how that can go along with, people are talking about blockchain to help with procurement integrity. I say join, efforts in thinking about how you can use technology ethically for the future of our world, really. So those would be my advice. They sound high level, but if you think about them, it's a strong call to action.
High level, well thought out, and nicely put. Unfortunately, we're out of time, Lola, and thank you again for being on our show. And we hope to have you back in the future. So, ladies and gentlemen, Lola Adekanye, our anti-corruption crusader. Thank you, Lola.
Thank you. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Pana.